Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Elite EDM Stars with myself, Darren Baton, aka the Dirty Midranger and DB9 Project. Hope you're all well and welcome to the channel. If you are new here, give us a like, a big thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel if you find the content useful. Let me just adjust my mic here so that I don't have to keep leaning forward. Bear with me a second, there we go, that's much better. Okay, so today's session we are going to cover mixing bass, and we're going to go over a few basic fundamentals of how to make the bass sit better in the mix, and then that will complete this section that we've been doing. I've done literally probably the last 4 weeks now, so I think this is part D on bass, house bass lines, mixing bass, bass techniques, stereo bass, widening your bass, etc. So this one is just, I think I've got about 9 slides, 7 slides of information just to go through on mixing bass, and then I've got a few examples of in Ableton Live of some different bass, they're just bass samples that I've just thrown in, and then I've split them and made subs out of them. I've created MIDIs from them and added subs into, like, for example, a bass guitar sample where it's lacking in the sub range. So it's just about mixing today. So let's get straight into the slides. I'm just going to switch my cameras. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. That's me recording because I've been recording videos all week. Hi there. I've been recording videos for our new course, so let me just resize myself down. 1 second. There we go. There we go. So, let's get into the content. I'm going to go straight into the slides. We are, as I said, mentioned the last few weeks, developing your own house music style. So again, I've been using the Sample Magic book, Secrets to House Music Production, and just a quote there: supplying low end energy, rhythmic balls, and occasionally cracking melodies, the bass can make or break the track. So mixing the bass and getting the bass right is absolutely crucial for how your track is going to sound on a club system, on a car stereo system, on a mobile phone, on a computer, on people's headphones. It's all going to make a difference because the bass will just suck away at the headroom and there'll be nothing left in your track. So just a disclaimer again, I'm using the Sample Magic as a guide. Some of the techniques they are providing in here, they are done in Logic and Logic Pro, and I'm using Ableton Live. I no longer use Logic since it upgraded to Logic X. I just didn't bother moving forward with the Logic because I was just fully on Ableton Live, and I just didn't see the point in having Logic because I can do everything I need in Ableton, especially now in version 11. So let's get into bass in the mix. Okay, so EQ, compression, overdrive and sidechaining all help the bass throb. We all know about sidechaining techniques now. It's nothing new to us for those of you who know about that, but for those of you who don't, it is one of the best ways to actually make the bass pump and work well with your rhythm of the track and the kick drum. So bass EQ, when it comes to mixing, the secret to a punchy bass line is often as much about what is cut out than what is left in. Not only does the bass have to work closely with the kick, it also needs to fit into the wider mix, not intruding too far into the frequency areas inhabited by lead sounds, unless you are using the bass as a lead technique that you would find in electro or fidget tracks, for example, and not eating too much headroom at the low end either. So to do this, we need to carve the sound down to size, as a bass usually needs to be cut at both the upper and the lower ends. However, cuts need to be done carefully. Getting it wrong can seriously undermine a mix. Low pass filters cut high frequency harmonics, creating more room for lead sounds while leaving the low end intact. When deciding the filter cutoff point, aim to balance the fundamental weight of the bass where you feel its real pressure, with upper harmonics that fill out the frequency spectrum for a solid rounded bass sound. So here, a bit of technical explanation is useful. So a bass line playing at a note of E2 generates a fundamental frequency of 82.41 Hertz. Frequencies above that are harmonic tones of the original note. So when EQing this note, you would want to balance the fundamental 82.41 Hertz frequency where the bass has its power with its upper harmonics. In practice, most bass lines contain more than one note, and the pressure of a kick and other mix elements means that the EQ decisions are much about filtering the bass, fitting the bass into the mix as bringing out the fundamental frequencies. That said, your aim should still be to find the EQ sweet spot that captures the best of the deep low frequencies and the upper harmonics. So it is a case of maybe taking your EQ and sweeping it, putting the resonance up, finding a sweet spot where you find the nice harmonics in both tones of the low and the mid harmonics, and then bring the resonance back down again. With bass lines that move a lot, filter key tracking on a synthesizer's filter section on the panel, you usually have a filter key tracking. You can automate that. So it's used to maintain the relationship between the fundamental frequencies and the upper harmonics, helping bulk up higher notes that move otherwise might otherwise lose pressure. So again, as I say, you could just automate the key tracking. If you're going to lose pressure with some of the notes, bring the key tracking slightly up on the filter, and that will bring in the harmonics so that you don't lose the pressure of those notes. So high pass filters on bass. A high-pass filter plays a different role, cutting often audible low-end frequencies that eat into the headroom. Now, you'd think that cutting away the bass frequencies, you'd think that wouldn't be the right thing to do, but as we mentioned before, most club sound systems don't usually represent or reproduce more than 30 to 50 Hertz. Most speakers in the studio, for example, like my speakers, I'm not sure of the range because I haven't looked on the back, but I know roughly I can hear down to about 40 Hertz, 50 Hertz easily, 40 Hertz, and then below 30 Hertz you just start to hear a muffle. So you kind of need to know the range of your speakers, but most speakers, they will, you by cutting the low frequencies, you actually allow them to open up more headroom and actually sit better in the mix, and actually will produce better dynamic mixes that will sound, again, dynamically better overall on a sound system and allow everything in the mix to breathe. So to add punch to a weak bass line, roll off some of the very low end below 50 to 60 Hertz before it hits the compressor. So before you have your compressor on the bass, put your EQ in first, roll off that bass round about 50 to 60 Hertz, and then apply the compressor, so that the low frequencies are not affecting the compressor and the attack times and the release times of the compressor, because those long sine waves which are generating, imagine a 30 kilohertz sine wave sub bass frequency is about 17 meters in length. So you imagine what that long sine wave is doing to the compressor as it's pumping into it. It's just not allowing it to reset properly. So next, you use a shelving or a high pass filter to carve out some of the subs to make room for the critical frequencies in the 50 to 120 Hertz range. If needed, add another EQ. Can be used to again, after the compressor, to boost and cut other frequencies to help it sit right. So again, after you've got your first EQ, got your compressor working right, responding right in the mix, then apply another EQ to boost those frequency ranges to bring them out in the mix. And then cutting a notch at the main frequency the kick occupies helps separate the two of them. So on the bass, where the kick's main fundamental frequency sits, cut a little notch out just to allow those two to separate. Okay, so a little bass EQ tip. You can be used as an effect to create sonic tension in builds and breakdowns, and you can usually hear this. I do this quite a lot in my tracks. The way I used to do it was actually use just a filter, and high pass filter, and maybe a delay or a reverb effect coming up at the same time. But now I use the bass clef easy washout plugin. Sometimes I use it on bass tracks, sometimes I use it on individual tracks, or sometimes I use it on my final mix, and it helps to cut out those bass frequencies and add a little bit of reverb and delay and then compression to that sound to bring it out into the mix. So as I say, yes, you can either build your own chains. So if you have obviously an EQ, it helps to take away those low frequencies, so by strapping on a high pass filter across the bass and then slowly raise the frequency, so automating it up during the breakdown so that the bass gradually loses its impact in the mix. And then of course once it comes back into the mix, you drop in the drop you bypass your EQ, or you just reset your frequency back down. But it's easier to bypass the EQ, and the reason to bypass the EQ is because it turns the sound off. Because sometimes if you've got a resonance slightly boosted or on your frequency and you sweep it back down quickly, it will create like a sweeping effect, and it might not suit what you're kind of looking for. So just bypassing it will help just take it out the mix altogether. But that will help cause maximum dance floor mayhem. So experiment with the resonance too, and this is why I just mentioned about with the resonance, because obviously if you've got resonance and you're sweeping that back down, as it mentions here, for added scream factor, you can avoid big boosts when sweeping the lower frequencies, as you'll soon end up with some unpleasant volume spikes. So of course, imagine if you're sweeping back down, you're sweeping up your frequency and you want to sweep it back down suddenly, and you're sweeping a resonance frequency and you hit a fundamental frequency with a resonance boost, you're going to cause a lot of spikes, and that will just cause your compressors to go mad. It'll cause the mix to go insane, and the compressors on the final masters or on your output. So just be careful of what you're doing when you're sweeping around. Practice it first, then automate it once you're happy with it. So compression on bass. Compression is used to tighten up a flabby bass line, increasing the thickness and the pressure in the mix. How a compressor works basically in a nutshell is that it's looking to tame the high peaks, so anything that's peaking above the threshold level that we have. If we set a ratio of 2 to 1, anything that's cut below 1 decibel, 2 to 1 ratio will be cut by 2 decibels. So if it's a 4 to 1 ratio, everything below 1 decibel, or the threshold of you set, will be cut by 4 decibels. So that's where you have to bring the makeup gain into play. But the idea is that we're taming the peaks, and it will bring up any low sounds in the mix. So if you've got a lot of signal noise, be prepared to bring that signal noise up and maybe cut it out with a noise gate. If it's a recorded bass, for example, that's been DI'd in, you shouldn't have too many problems, but there may be some external floor noise or signal to noise ratio. But the idea is that the compressor will sort of bring the peaks down and bring up the low sections and lower notes and sort of make it smoother. So imagine like the sausage fattener type plugin. So it's used to tighten up a flabby bass, increasing the thickness and presence in the mix. It can also be used when volume spikes and transients are eating too much headroom to make the volume more consistent. And that's what I was talking about there. It makes everything so more consistent. It brings the big volume spikes and crushes them down. To increase the body, use a soft setting with a medium attack and release to shave between 3 and 5 decibels off the signal. To calm the volume spikes, use a fast attack and release to catch the front of the sound so that the volume remains stable. And then that's where I mentioned about to use the makeup gain to bring up the volume. So obviously if you use a ratio of say 4:1, you've probably reduced about nearly 4 decibels in volume, so you've got to bring that back up with the makeup gain. You can either use the automatic makeup gain or adjust it yourself manually. And then so you bring up the volume to the same level and the original as the original, and then compare the difference by A-Bing with the unaffected version. So just literally have an unaffected version and have an affected version, maybe duplicate 2 tracks and then just A-B and compare the 2 different basses, and you'll see the difference between those 2 obviously. And don't forget, if you've got any sort of send effects like we were doing last week, where we've got stereo on the stereo mid basses, and then on the lower basses you've got maybe a mono mixed in mono, so you've got some sends running through there. So don't forget that things might be beefed up, but always check what you're doing, always go back and look and just trace back everything back to the beginning. So some engineers use parallel compression on a bass line, either by busing it the bass to another track with Stonewall compression, or by using a compressor as an insert with a wet-dry mix control. So there's a couple of ways in the examples I'm going to show you shortly. There's a couple of ways I've got this set up, and I've tried setting up the examples that we're going to cover in a second, which are set up for Logic. I've tried doing it that way, but the busing system that way in Ableton doesn't seem to be as strong. So there are obviously different ways to do it in Ableton, but I'm going to show you. Well, saying that, really, there's not much difference between the parallel compression from a send and actually dropping it on as an insert, but I will show you that in a sec. So the trick is to slam the compressor hard. So we have a brick wall limiter, so put your ratio back up to sort of limit up to full 10:1 ratio. And then mix it back into the original signal until it adds extra body and texture. So sidechaining the bass, we all know about the sidechaining is a popular technique. It's a sidechain the bass on the compression on the bass acts as both a technical problem solver and a creative tool. Whichever way you use it, the method is the same. So sidechaining involves routing the signal from one channel on the mixing desk to control another. If you think about sidechaining as when you're on in a nightclub or a radio station, when the DJ talks and there's music playing and he talks on a mic, the music goes down. Well, that's technically a sidechain input, and that's how the mic is working through the mixer. It's acting as a sidechain, so it ducks the sound down, and then when you stop talking, the music comes back up. It's exactly the same technique, and that's where sidechaining really came from, and was used then as a technique in creating music as well. So sidechaining, as I said, it involves routing the signal from one channel to another. When using a bass line, it always uses the kick drum to drive the sidechain to control the volume of the bass. The steady floor-to-floor kick ducks the bass volume in a perfect sync against the kick, so it breathes with the groove. So it's pushing the kick drums, pushing the bass out and letting it breathe. This compression can be used subtly to prevent headroom space battles. On medium settings, the rhythm becomes more noticeable and the bass line will start to audibly pump. On more extreme settings, the whole bass line ducks and sucks back up in volume, creating the classic fidget sound. So that kind of womp womp womp. Experiment with the compressor's attack and release settings to change the shape of the suck sounds, and that help the bass lock into its groove. So a bass tip or a bass sidechaining tip is good practice to trigger the sidechain from a muted track that has a kick on each beat. So I always use a muted kick drum or a hi-hat or something to trigger. I always use a MIDI pattern so I can use shorter notes, so don't use the full kick. And then I also adjust a few different parameters, but we'll come into that shortly. So even when the kick's not playing, the bass line still pumps. This technique has other advantages too. Sometimes the main kick will have too much sustain or too many sub-frequencies, throwing off the compressor so it doesn't reset fast enough to get a good balance back. And that's what I mentioned earlier on about having a kick drum that's too heavy as a sidechain trigger, and having too much bass in the low end, when that's going through into a compressor, it's the same sort of thing. It's not giving the compressor time to reset. So in these situations, use a shorter kick or just a muted kick sample envelope generator, and just shorten down the sustain or the decay of the sample. So we're going to walk through, and as I say, these examples were set up for in the Secrets to House Music Guide. These examples were actually set up for Logic, but I'm going to use, my examples are for Ableton Live. So we set up the kick track and route it to a buzz auxiliary send. So on Logic, you just literally send your kick track, so a sidechain trigger track, and route it to an auxiliary bus. Create a 1 bar kick loop, and on the 4-to-floor, mute the output of both the bus and trigger track, and this means that the kick will still play but not be audible in the mix. Side chaining from the silent kick means you can keep the bass line pumping even when the main kick drops out, and as I mentioned there, this example is for Logic Pro users. So as you can see in my example, in example 1, I've literally got there, I've created a sidechain trigger with a MIDI file, and also I've created an audio channel which is a bass bus as well. So that's how I do it with mine, and my bass bus has got an input, and I just route my sidechain trigger through to a bass. So that's one way of setting up your own unique auxiliary bus send. The other way is to do it through the sends, but I find that this way is a lot more effective. And obviously with Ableton Live, we don't need to do that as such. We can actually just drop a compressor as an insert and have the sidechain trigger come to it. But if you've got a computer which is running low RAM and you're struggling, what you can do obviously is do this with the bass bus send example, because it means you can send multiple different things to that one bus and sidechain. So you're just using one compressor rather than having, say, maybe 4 or 5 bass lines or 4 or 5 things that are all sidechaining and they've all got different compressors on, which is taking up memory, it's taking up RAM, it's taking up CPU power. So this example is really good for, you know, people who've got limited computer resources basically. So secondly, we insert a compressor on the bass line, turn on the sidechain input, and select the bus that the trigger kicker has been assigned to. So you can see my example there. I've set up my sidechain on my compressor and audio from the bass bus. Secondly, third, we reduce the threshold and slowly increase the ratio to increase the intensity of the effect. The threshold parameter sets the minimum volume level, and the bass will drop to when the kick hits. Use the ratio parameter to control the intensity of that pump. And as you can see in the examples there, I've got 2 different examples where I've got different ratio, different threshold settings. The ratio is the same, about 5 to 1, but I've got different attack and release settings, and you can see the difference on the shapes of the sidechain. You can see how it's shaping more like a sawtooth on the bottom, sawtooth on the top, but very like erratic sawtooth, where it's more like a calm wave on the bottom one. So work the groove by adjusting the attack and release controls. These shape the way that the compressor pumps and sucks. To get it bouncing, set the attack to minimum and slowly reduce the release controls from the maximum position. So set your attack down to 0, open up your release as you can see in my example there, and then slowly bring the release down to where it sits and where you want it. All compressors react differently, so experiment with different types to see what works best for the tracks. I can't say which ones work best, but we may be going over some of those soon with some of the ulterior effects plugins, so hopefully I'll get to try out a few new compressors and stuff soon, and I'll give you some reports and hopefully some tutorials and run-throughs on those. So part 5, if there's a slight click at the front of the bass, it can usually be limited by increasing the attack or maybe the release as well, if you've got a sharp release, but usually the attack will just take away any clicks. And then if in some situations a long subby kick can cause the trigger to open for far too long, because the compressor doesn't have time to suck back. Using an EQ or a filter on the side chain input can remedy this. A high-pass filter is the most effective tool for reducing the length of a kick, but I find that the sustain actually works better on the actual attack envelope controls of my sampler. So part 7, another way to resolve the potential trigger length is what I've just mentioned, is by tweaking the decay and sustain length of the kick that is driving the sidechain by altering its amp envelope settings in the sampler. And that's what I just said. And also, if you want to do it manually, if it's just one maybe audio file, or if you want to print your bass down to audio, again, if you're struggling with CPU power and you're struggling with RAM to run Ableton Live, you can bounce the bassline ideas down to audio and then go into the volume control and draw in the sidechain yourself. So some DAWs, including Cubase, Ableton Live, let you draw a pumping volume curve directly onto the audio file. This can be a quick and precise way of adding the pump effect to clip, but it can get tedious if lots of different audio takes are used. So just a note there, Cubase and Ableton Live also have a sidechain inputs now that work directly from their compressor, and therefore there's no need for a buzz auxiliary send. In fact, probably most DAWs now have sidechain compressors set up on that, so Fruity Loops, etc., Bitwig, they've all probably got sidechain compressors where you can just drop it on as a track and just drop an insert as an insert, and then send the sidechain trigger and just turn it on. So but as I say, if you are struggling for CPU power, those are some great ways to actually do that. The bus send examples, and it will save you lots of time. And again, if you're struggling for RAM, bouncing down to audio and then doing something like I've done there will work. Or if you use something like Nicky Romero kick plugin, but not the actual kick sample plugin, the actual sidechain one, or the Nicky Romero the Cable Guy sidechain plugin, or LFO tool, anything like that that creates a sidechain that allows you to actually adjust the volume. An envelope shaper, you could use an envelope shaper and automate it up and down to make it pump on every fraction, and make it just pump, drop down. Anything volume shaper, anything, automate the actual volume of the slider in the track. But doing it like this, and in part 8, it does it inside the clip, in the clip envelope, so it allows it to just do it automatically. So then that's not affecting your bass mix channel, because you don't affect any of these mix channels really. If you want to move them live, for example, if you were running a track live and you've got lots of automation and your sliders are going up and down, you won't be able to sort of override those. And if you do override them, any automation in the rest of the track will just sort of reset itself and it won't work. So you have to be mindful of the things that you're doing to simplify your productions. But I just wanted to touch on that, guys, before we go into the examples, because it just helps you in doing different ways. There's so many different production techniques that, I mean, I've forgotten a lot of the things that I used to teach. I used to teach this kind of stuff on a weekly basis for 5 years, and a lot of the things that I used to teach have actually sort of you forget. I have to pick up a book to remind myself of a certain subject sometimes. So you know, I'd like to try and relay all my information as much as I can to you, as best as I can. That will help get it across. I'm sorry if it's boring. I'm sorry if these slides will bore you, but I'm trying to give base information for people who are just getting into the scene and just learning about mixing and stuff, and wondering why their mixes are not so great. So let's get into this, guys. If anybody's around, say hi. I can't see my chat at the moment. That's weird. Oh well, okay. I can't see if anybody's in the chat, but if anybody's in there, please do say hi. Leave us a comment. But let's go into the examples. I've got my Ableton Live here. Now what I've done is I've picked a few different examples. The kick drum's not the best. It's just a kick drum in the key of E. And the reason for that, and do excuse me because I'm going to have to just reconnect my hard drive because the samples are missing. I basically run everything from my hard drive just to save space really, and it works quite fine. But I'm just going to have to reload this project, guys. Just bear with me a second. Okay, that was painless. Okay, so I've got a couple of bass examples. They are just samples, and I was just going through the Ableton sample library yesterday and found a few of these samples just in the bass sample section. And I found specifically in the key of E because we want to focus around that. Remember that frequency of 80, or was it 42 or 82, 83 or was it 82.41 hertz, something like that. So I've got different examples, and let me just give myself a bit of real estate. There we go. So the first one, and that's not the one I was going to use, so we're going to go, I think it was these two, that's right. So these two here. What I've done, I've got this bass sample here, and I've duplicated it up again and stripped out some of the frequencies. So if you look on the first one, I've EQ'd out completely all of the low end. Turned off the compressor at the moment, and there's a few reasons for this because I'm going to show you different sort of side chaining techniques. I've obviously got some stereo bass on there, and I've got my bass on the other ones. These are set up channels from last week, and now I include these in my templates as standard. So that was, if you haven't seen that video, go back from last week and watch the video about the stereo bass mixing and sub bass mixing for mono bass on your subs. But coming into here, I'm going to play this for you. Okay, so what I was trying to show you there, guys, basically was the the different settings I've got here. So on this bass here, this is just been side chained. If you come to the track, that's been side chained from first of all the bass bus, this one channel here. So I created an audio channel, put the inset to in, and then it's basically creating me a bass bus that's going to master. The sidechain trigger here, short notes, and sometimes I even come back this far just to create just that trigger. And the shorter the note, the MIDI, obviously the longer they play, the longer the note sustains on the actual sample. Okay, so you can see the difference there when I change this. So this is why I always use a MIDI, and then I can adjust that. And basically, that's, even though that kick drum is the same as this kick drum here, I'm controlling it with the sustain and also with the shape of the MIDI notes and coming right down. So I'm literally just getting that duck, and I can even, as I say, just go in like that. But if you notice the difference, there's no actual difference really in terms of the side chain coming from the bass bus or directly actually from the trigger itself. So here all I'm doing is literally routing this through to another channel to then side chain and trigger from this, and it's just acting basically as an intermediate channel. Whereas if we can just come here and actually just go sidechain on and sidechain trigger, but there's no difference between that and doing that. But just doing it this way, sometimes it can allow us, we could actually, what we could do is we could actually put another sidechain compressor onto here on this bass bus and route things through that and sidechain everything through one bus. So there's so many different ways of setting bus channels up. You know, you've sort of got to experiment and try things out, and that's how you find happy accidents sometimes. Sometimes you may route something up and it's wrong, but just be mindful of where you're routing. But however way you want to do it, it's absolutely fine. You know, you could try. I tried it to actually setting up a send on here, but that didn't work. It wasn't very strong. And again, obviously, if you're doing it this way with the volume shapers. So if you just come into here, come into your clip and my gain, if you're doing it this way, don't forget that if there is a compressor on there, turn the compressor off. So if you just listen to that. And again, you can hear what I'm doing there. I'm just literally throwing this stereo bass chorus here, and I could automate this obviously as well. I could automate this rate as it's coming through in real time. We could actually put just a controller on that. I'm just going to do that very, very quickly. So I can just do that and then play that through, and then I could automate this through as well. It's my stereo bass. Okay guys, so that's example one. And again, so as I say, that if you look at the bass here on this low one, I've just literally shelved everything through, curved it off nicely, top and bottom. So I'm just getting those nice fundamentals in around here. EQ again rolling off here. Just taking that away completely, just so we've got, and I've just slightly boosted the highs there, but I could probably put a nice little bump there as well. So we just sort of bump there very sharply. So that's example one. So let's have a look at the next two examples we've got here. What I've done here is the same sort of thing. I've got another bass sample. And this actually sounds like Swedish House Mafia, quite ironically. So let's just close these down so I know which is which. So we've got this one, and I've done the same again, but this time what I've done is I've taken the notes and I've actually bounced them down to MIDI. So you can see here. And to do that, just right click, convert melody to MIDI track. You can try harmony, but in this case I'll try the melody because the bass is playing more like a melody, or more like an arpeggiation type bass. And then what I've done here is put on a silent, blank silent, reset silent when you come into your menus, initialize your patch, and then what I've done is used a sine wave with two voices just to thicken it slightly, because I tried to detune it. I was playing around with that, but I'll show you that in a second. And again, you've got to play around with the octaves of the notes, and this is why I wanted to show these examples, so that my lowest note is E1, and really coming down to E0 you are pushing it down here really. Anything below C1 you tend to start to lose, and it just goes dissonant on speaker systems, so we're going to lose that really. So let me just go into these two examples. I'll break them down again. Same sort of thing, sidechain compression from the bass bus, so I'm not going to go through this one again because I've explained how this kind of works. It's up to you how you want to set up your sidechains really, but this, yeah. If anybody's got any questions on this and they're not too sure, and I'm quite happy to sort of do a video on it and explain it in more detail, but as it stands, let's go into these examples. Okay guys, so I just wanted to show you that. I just wanted to show you that, guys, because I basically I wanted to just see what was happening on the spectrum here. So just look, as obviously when I'm tuning, and this is again another indication if you've got no speakers that are you don't produce very low frequencies below 50 Hertz. This is a great way of understanding what's going on. So bring up your analyzer on your bass, and then just tune your octave to your bass, either changing the MIDI notes up and down, but obviously I've got them sitting on here. I don't really want to be going anything lower than C1. Okay, so by obviously coming to playing the bass, looking through it and seeing what's going on here, we can see that the frequencies, the tones, when I tune it, you can see the fundamentals are sitting around about here or here. So we're just looking for that nice rounded tone with our sub, and all it's doing is adding just little bits of bottom weight to the mix, and I'll do this to separate them, so I can then put parallel compression onto them individually as well, rather than having to do the whole bass and it's just all one thing. You can treat everything separately. So obviously with these basses I've got stereo going on and mono. So I've made the tops, I took one sample, made it to a mid bass, and then I've just created a sub out of the same bass and put that into mono, so that it fills out that low spectrum. It's going to thump, it's going to hit hard on club sound systems. Okay, so the last one, guys, before I wrap this session up, and just to let you know that next week, the next session, what I'm going to start doing is we're going to go into some synth anatomy, but we'll come to that actually in a second. I just want to show you, if I get to the end of my slides, I didn't show you right at the very end, but next week's session, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do some synth anatomy, classic 90s house pianos and stabs, fat leads and ARP sounds, pads, and soulful house Rhodes type sounds. So we're going to start breaking down some synth anatomy so that we can start creating these sounds ourselves and then saving those patches, and then we've got our own banks of libraries. So you becoming, your own unique producer. You start to create your own unique sounds that you can then layer and stack together to create bigger sounds, or stack them with existing presets to make that preset sound a little bit more unique. And it's really just part and parcel of actually developing your own style as a producer, and developing your own sound, really. So that will wrap up the bass part. And we'll cover that next week. I just wanted to show you this then. So the last example I've got here is a bass guitar. It's a plucked bass, or sort of a real bass guitar. Okay, so again, what I did, the same sort of thing. I took the bass sample, I extracted it, and I'm going to do it again to show you. And when I went into the MIDI part, you can see there's a lot of little tweaky little notes. So if you compare that, I'm going to change the colour so we can obviously see the difference. And if you compare that to the one I've got here, and you can see what I've done. What's happened there? That's bizarre. It's not letting me select both the notes. It's just covering them, so you can see what's basically going on. The blue notes, I've taken just these little sections out. So if we come into this MIDI part here, I've just literally moved some of the notes out. I again have created another silence. I've just slightly put a bit of bump on the fundamental frequency here, just to give it a bit of a boost. Now the bass again, you've got to sort of play around. If you look at our lowest notes here, what have we got? G0. So we are pushing past that really point where we're going to start to lose these notes on big sound systems. So we may have to push them up. So it's a case of trying to push the notes up or tweak them with your oscillators and tune your octaves and try and get something that sits right. So we, you know, again, listen to those subs on these speakers. Listen to the, you know, are you losing those last few notes because they are below C1? We are kind of pushing it really. So let's play this bass and see what happens in the different areas. So as you can see, guys, we start to literally, we are just at the very bottom really of the range. G0 is really pushing the bottom end of a bass subnote. So we've just about managed to get that into there and that to sound right. I mean, again, I've had to leave the octaves on 0 on this one. But also we could try using, if it's not fitting right and you're losing that, try using a triangle wave or a square. A square will have too many maybe harmonics and a saw will have too many upper harmonics, so use a filter on it. But it can be possible. So let's have a play, see what we can come up with. So guys, that pretty much wraps up the mixing in the bass sections really. I'm just going to cover a few things again on compression. We've covered a few things over there. I've not really compressed any of these bass samples yet or anything, but if we were to compress them, bringing in these extra subs, what I could do, for example, let's go back to this nice, one of the nice electro, this one here. Let's just turn these two off. And if I was going to EQ, compress this, let's just put a compressor on. We could put some EQ parallel compression on. Another way, obviously, we could just go to and insert a send, or we could put a bass low end parallel punch compressor directly as an insert onto the track itself. That's one way of doing it. Or if you want to send them all, use the same one. This is why sending it to a send is really good. So we could either use a parallel one here, but I don't want to do that. I just want to use a normal compressor. I'm going to use a brick wall compressor, so it's slammed out, and not completely full ratio, but about between 5 and 10, 7 to 1, something like that. And let's have a listen. I'm going to feed that back into my bass mix, and then I'm going to do a few other things to make this sit nicely in the mix. Okay guys, so that's one way. That's stone wall compression. That's running the stone wall through. The other way would obviously be to just directly, as I say, insert a bass, parallel glue compressor bass and punch onto there. Let's have a listen. Okay guys, so sorry for spending so much time with low sub sounds going on. Apologies if it's wrecking your speakers, but it's just important to understand what's going on down in these low frequencies. And you can see that I'm trying two different ways of compression. I'm trying stone wall, brick wall compression, running through as an insert, and then I'm also trying just a parallel bass compressor. This doesn't seem to add much, apart from when I change the attack and the release. You can hear a few more harmonics come in when I reduce the attack below 0 into a minus. Whereas when I feed in the brick wall, that adds in a lot more bass and harmonics, and that's the traditional kind of what's known as parallel compression, Stonewall compression, New York compression, whatever you want to call it, really. So yeah, have a play around with that, guys, and hope it helps with your bass mixing. As I say, always treat them as separate. So when you create a bass, create 2 versions, put one into mono. Obviously I haven't got this specific one directly in mono at the moment, but I've got a channel feeding into it which is mono. But ideally what I would do as well on this sub is I would come here and I would put my utility. Where are we? I forgot where they are. There we are. And I would just come in, I would have put bass mono on at the start, so I'm making sure that my bass is always in mono, my subs are always in mono. It's coming through as a mono channel. My sub bass send to feed in some stereo, or some not some stereo but some chorus bass. This is just a bit of chorus bass to add a bit of movement to the sort of monosonic signal, and that's been fed into the mix here. And again, so I've got the parallel, can add a little bit more extra weight to it. So if you've got a kind of a sub that is there but is missing just some bit of knock into it, you need to boost just to get a little bit of harmonic content back into it, just so that those knocks come out. Again, maybe shape the envelope of the bass of the sub. We could come in and maybe shape some of the parameters on the bass. You can see what I've got going on here, and this is just a sine wave, and that's going, the sustain is right at full. I've got a bit of a release, and you'll see what happens if I don't do that. You'll get a knocking kind of sound. Okay guys, so you can see just by playing around with the amp envelope, I can shorten that, so I can make the release so that the notes come up a little bit more, so it sounds a little bit more rolling. It all according to what you want your sub to kind of do. Do you want it to be blocky? Do you want it to sort of create like little steps? Do you want it to be smooth and rolling? So again, changing the release times of the envelope on the amp envelope is going to help that as well. So I hope that's been useful for you guys, and that kind of completes this 4-part session that we've done on developing bass lines, developing bass ideas, stereo mono bass mixing, etc, etc. And that today finally covers the last part of the bass mixing session. So if you join me next week, hopefully I'll have the start of the content for you, for the new content for the synth anatomy, and then we'll start sort of showing some classic kind of piano sounds, rave sounds, and some of the patterns that you use to create those as well. And we'll take that a little bit further. in development, and hopefully I shall start bringing in some of the Arturia plugins into the sessions as well for some of the sound design. That may be perfect for next week actually, because I've yet to install the plugins, but it's knowing which ones to go for first and which are the best ones to sort of use for the synth demonstrations. So I'm going to be testing some of those out. If there's no content next week, guys, there will be the week after. I'm hoping to have the sessions done for next week. Purely the reason being is the fact that I've recorded 17 videos this week and been editing those videos ready for our course. We're just trying to get those done and uploaded online. We've just got a slight little issue with the actual videos appearing on the home page, actually on the pages. We upload the links, we upload the videos, and they don't want to sync from YouTube. So we're basically using YouTube as a server, and they don't want to link. They work fine as embedded videos, but the actual link for the content where you place it inside the actual website when we build the units for the courses doesn't want to work at the moment. So we're just working with the developers to try and resolve that. But yeah, things are coming along, guys. As I say, I've been busy every day this week recording videos. Probably just over halfway now. Probably got about 28 videos to record all in all, so I'm just over halfway. And it's been a very busy week, so I'm absolutely shattered. I'm going to leave you guys now. Have a great weekend. And I'm going to go over and jump over to do a Facebook live session, and then I'm going to chill out for the weekend, enjoy this lovely sunshine. I'm going to work on some remix over the weekend. I'm going to work on an original track. I'm going to play around with these stereo bass mixing techniques, because not only has this been enjoyable for me to deliver this content to you guys, it's actually helped me as well to revamp and remember some of the mixing techniques that I used to use many years ago. So it's been useful as a two-way thing for me to deliver this content for you. So hopefully I can try and continue to deliver more content over the coming weeks. And so yeah, if you like the channel, please subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye bye.